If you're a Christian and American, you probably were taught that socialism is unbiblical. You were taught that capitalism is God's chosen economic system, that Jesus will be against the redistribution of wealth, and maybe that even the early church in the book of Acts was nothing more than a group of friends hanging out, just sharing their stuff, sharing food, and just, chilling. You probably heard this stuff in sermons. You've definitely heard it from politicians. And I would also say you probably heard it from anybody that's a boomer or that age. But are those arguments true with respect to Christianity and socialism? In today's episode, we're going to be answering that question, right? Should Christians be socialists? Is Christian moral practice, is Christian ethics really at odds with socialism? Or have many of us been taught a version of Christianity that has been blended with modern conservative political and economic thought, such that it has delinked us, one might say, from the radical teachings of Jesus Christ? Stick around, because what you hear will probably change how you read the Bible. Thanks for joining us. Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christians podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians, and also the kind who show up on Fox News when they are trying to conflate progressive politics, socialism, and communism. So, if you're curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, then this is a podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter, and I'm your host, and I am joined by such Fox News contributors as Reverend Blair. Blair, how are you doing?
Please don't call me that. I am not a Fox. It was not willing. They did not request permission before they used my material. But I can't sue because it's fair use. But
it is fair use. For those of you who don't know, what episode was that on Jesse Waters?
I think it came out on Wednesday. Wait, today's Wednesday. So last Monday.
So 17th. Yeah. So it would have been on November 17th. Not that you ever, I'm sure none of y'all watch Fox News if you listen to this podcast, but unless you are trying to torture yourself. Although it is entertaining. I will say that. Like when I've watched it, like it's like watching soap opera. It's crazy. Anyway, we are also joined by Julia. Julia, how are you doing?
I'm still here. Hi.
Still here. Hair looking beautiful. Looking beautiful. And Wesley, how are you doing?
Doing good. Enjoying this nice little break from the rain in Los Angeles.
I know. We shouldn't really complain about weather, but I hate the rain. And Everest, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really happy that our groundwater is slowly being replenished. So I actually love the rain.
I know.
Check yourselves, guys.
I know. And the thing is, I, as an environmental, I understand. I totally, you know what? The worst part about the rain in Los Angeles is that growing up in the elements, I know how to drive in it, and so many people out here do not.
No one else knows.
Don't. Yeah, and so yeah. Well,
the city is not made for rain. I'm just playing. It's actually very, very inconvenient.
Dangerous.
The biggest problem is the streets flood and sidewalks flood, and I always say people forget how to walk in the rain in LA, let alone drive.
Yeah.
Blair, how did you find out that you were on Fox News?
Yeah, a troll tagged me, which is so funny because I would not have found out. But somebody who was like trying to make fun of me and had made a negative comment on one of my other videos tagged me in the Jesse Waters post on TikTok. That is the only way I found out. Fox News did not reach out at all.
Wow. And such a beautiful segue to a conversation we were having before we started recording. Again, thank you all for listening. We want to invite you to please subscribe to the podcast. If you're on YouTube, subscribe, like the video. That actually does help the algorithm promote our content, and we are trying to be a voice of resistance to the conservative religious propaganda, quite honestly, that you find on these channels. And I have done a decent job, not the best, but a decent job of trying to engage a lot of the comments. But I've had some challenges, as I've mentioned before, and we are in the process of actually expanding our podcast team, and we've hired someone that's going to kind of help us with production. And one of the things that he was telling me, what I just learned, was there's something like, I think it was like 40 to 50% they are finding of internet comments on things like YouTube or on social media is actually bots. And I know, Wesley, you had some thoughts on this when we were talking about it earlier, because I was shocked and at the same time not shocked, because the comments are like insane that we get.
Yeah, it reminded me of what is called the dead internet theory. According to the University of New South Wales, the dead internet theory essentially claims that activity and content on the internet, including social media accounts, are predominantly being created and automated by artificial intelligence agents. These agents can rapidly create posts alongside AI-generated images designed to farm engagement, like clicks, comments, on platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And so it's this idea that like most of the engagement that you see happening on the internet is bots responding to bots, and sort of just in this cycle of producing content for one another, but not really humans in the same way
And
that we
So
think about the internet.
dystopian.
Yeah.
It's very dystopian. So please, again, rate, subscribe, share an episode with someone if you think they'll find it interesting, or if you feel like you're trying to slowly pull them over to the right side of history. And we wanted to have this conversation. Ostensibly, it came up in a conversation that I was actually having with Everest and Wesley about politics, particularly in light of Zoran Mamdani, which I know we're going to talk about today, and just the way you see this emerging chorus of people of faith and people in general moving towards more socialist politics. But then it just so happened that Blair got spotlighted on Fox News. So I want to start with this because I thought it was interesting. So Blair, maybe you can say a little bit more about. I'll let you take the lead on this segment.
So the Jesse Waters show pulled segments of one of my TikTok videos about how Zoran Mamdani is a Christ-like politician because he defines democratic socialism as the upholding of human dignity and creating policies that uphold human dignity. And I was like, if ever there was something that Jesus does, that's it. Is like all throughout the Gospels, Jesus is saying we need to treat humans like humans, regardless of what the culture or the law says. They at least kept it like they clipped it, but they kept the point intact. So it was so funny to me that they were like using my claim that a community where everyone is treated with dignity looks like the kingdom of God. And they were using that as if it was some kind of like parody or joke.
But there's no part where you say the word socialism. The clip is literally Blair being like, I think the kingdom of God is a place where everyone has their basic needs met. I think that is awesome and Jesus would like that. And they're like, isn't that terrible?
Well, and then they claim that like socialists or Democrats are now worshiping Zoran Mamdani or worshiping socialism. And so they used my clip to introduce two other candidates, Maxine Durand for Idaho, who is a trans woman running for governor in Idaho in 2026, who has the tagline, everyone belongs in Idaho, which I think is just beautiful. And then Katie Wilson, who won the mayoral race in Seattle, and a clip of her talking about how she wants social housing and subsidized daycare and summer care, and she wants land to be owned by communities and not corporations. And then they were trying to like make fun of Starbucks employees for unionizing and going on strike and demanding wages that are livable in the cities where they work. And it's just so wild to me that they like created this whole thing off of my theological point, which is that we should support policies that look like Jesus. And then they were trying to like make a mockery of this idea that like we're worshiping socialism instead of we're worshiping Christ and Christ-like ideals, which are all humans deserve to be cared for and loved.
I don't watch Jesse Waters' show. I've never watched it. I have no idea if he even talks about the Bible. I suspect he talks about religion at some point, but they're not actually, and many people, as we get into this conversation today, they selectively, there's only one thing that we could find that Jesus says that maybe you could say might be capitalist. That's how many qualifiers I have to have. Everything else is very much about human dignity and what we will call and how we define socialist values. But at the same time, I think what they're doing, and Blair, what I think you put in the comments and in the show notes was they are conflating communism and socialism. Correct?
Oh, absolutely. They don't separate them at all. They are taking socialist statements, which is not elimination of capitalism, but restriction of capitalism to maintain human dignity so that humans do not become part of the capital that is purchased and sold. Whereas communism is like an elimination of capitalism. And they use this sort of like Red Scare old 1950s Cold War language to try and make it seem like it's this grand conspiracy that people are demanding fair treatment in their workplaces.
Are these people serious? Or are they trolling? I genuinely and sincerely can't tell, because what is it? Like, I understand, like, Jesse Waters is a member of, like, this is the problem with the media.
I have a theory, Julia.
Please.
I think, because I just was thinking this in my brain. I was like, we have to be like actually really close to class consciousness if they are doing a bit where they're like, isn't it so stupid that workers want to be paid enough and people don't want companies to own the land that they are gathering on? And but like, I think that the people behind this are not trolls, but they are the people that are benefiting so much from the existing system that they are just like creating propaganda to uphold the existing system where they get to be extremely wealthy to distribute among people that like the system actually does not work for, so that they can conflate again socialism, communism, and progressive ideology in this way that's supposed to scare them away from building any kind of class consciousness. That is the only theory I can think of.
I mean, it's also they do have class consciousness, but it's they identify with the billionaires more than they identify with the regular person, because in any conversation about instituting a wealth tax or anything that gets at anyone who might be a millionaire, the people, the pundits of the pundit class come out in opposition to it because they see their own interest implicated in these changes. If you're Jesse Waters, I don't know how he makes it at Fox News, but I'm sure he's making millions of dollars. So he's aligning himself because he benefits from it with the billionaire class. And so you get these perpetuations of or these conflations of communism and socialism, or you call communism anything that tries to bring a little dignity to the working class.
Also, according to the Google, Jesse Waters has a net worth of around $85 million. So yeah,
Yep.
I mean, he was on salary for like somewhere between 11 and $16 million per contract a year. So it's like, of course, he doesn't want his taxes to go up. I just don't understand how the average person who watches his show, who is not worth $85 million, could listen to it and think, yeah, man, I just want too much.
No,
That's why it has to be tied to being heretical. That is like why I think the religious tie is so relevant, because if you are like the people that want these things also are like worshiping false idols, and the people that want these things are also tearing apart the Christianity that you know and love, and they're spitting on the things that you think are sacred, then you get to like wrap it all up with a bow and be like, don't think too much about the things that they're asking for, because they also are like against everything that's important to you.
There's a great episode of Throughline I'm going to put in our show notes. It does such a good job because, Everest, I think you're correct in terms of this is happening at a time when people are developing class consciousness and there's a response. The last time we had a response that was like, this was FDR and this radical redistribution of wealth that, didn't go to our, like, by our, I mean me, brown person, black, this redistribution didn't include me, but it was a redistribution from a billionaire class because of the stock market crash. That's when you get Social Security. That's when you start getting the federal works projects. That's when you get a lot of the infrastructure we have in this country that ultimately gave us the capacity to compete in World War II. I mean, you can really trace a line to see how these things were good for us. As a response to this redistribution, Maynard Keynes and a few other folks got together in, I want to say, Switzerland, if I remember correctly, and had like this high-level conversation around how can we create and promote the kind of capitalism that ultimately led to the economic collapse, but we're going to do it in a different way where this time there won't be a collapse, right? But that was the basic gist of it. The point that I think I wanted to have or get to when we're having this conversation is not only the conflation of terms, but how I do think the rise of class consciousness now, or the rise of the ways in which we are realizing that the system, I think this is the thing that, I'm sorry, I'm going all over the place, but I was just thinking about the ways in which MAGA folks, especially early 2016, Trump was able to get them on board. When he said the system is rigged, he wasn't lying. And they know it's rigged. He's like, system is rigged. And they're like, yes, it's rigged. He told them, I think, the wrong answer. He told them an answer that's a lie. He told them that the reason you're suffering is because of poor people, it's because of brown people, it's because of immigrants, it's because they're taking your jobs, right? He lied, but he was honest with them. And the reason you have these Chuck Schumer, Democrats that don't want to be honest, because while the Republicans and conservatives are bought by the billionaire class, you got these moderate Democrats that are owned by corporations. They're not being honest and saying, yeah, the system is rigged and it is against you. And so you have to, from their perspective, in order to persuade those people who are suffering, make this kind of economic practice religious, right? Like they are making it religious such that it feels like it's something, it's a moral requirement. And so,
Like, because they think what, God is a capitalist?
yes.
mean-
and so, and so
Well,
this
you
is
know what I say. I say it's the other way around.
I think, and so I think this gets a good point for us to kind of now define terms and then get into some of the counter arguments against socialism and even the kind of politics that we see in someone like a Zoran Mamdani, or like, because I hadn't even heard about the mayor of Seattle, Blair, until she was on Fox. So this actually shows me how much what Zoran Mamdani is experiencing is Islamophobia. Right, because the lady in Seattle is like, she's talking about social housing.
She has,
you know
like,
what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, even more extreme policies than he does. But I guess maybe because New York is where all the
she's a nice
capitalists
white
live.
lady.
Well, it's New York is where all the capitalists live, and they are responding, right? All of the owners of the big banks, it's where Wall Street trades. Like, literally, Wall Street is named for the street in New York where the trading happens. And so Seattle is not seen as like this bastion of capitalist values. It is seen as one of these more progressive cities. So it's less extreme that she's being elected, as opposed to Zoran Mamdani, like right in the heart of capitalist empire.
Well, and Seattle is not a battleground. Like, I mean, like, obviously New York is a progressive city, but I just mean, like, I feel like conservatives are like, Seattle is already lost to us. Seattle is gone.
No offense to Seattle, it's not New York. Like, you don't have the same, like, we had you saw it on when she went onto Fox News. Like, people have been following the New York mayoral race for a year on a national stage. And on top of that, I mean, I definitely think Islamophobia has a lot to do with that, or at least specifically attacks that have been waged against him, against Zoran. But you also had him taking on the Democratic establishment. So, like, there was so many more points that made it and elevated a national conversation. But I don't deny that the fact that she's a nice white lady and he's a Muslim brown man had something to play into it.
And also, Andrew Cuomo is like very high profile and got so much attention during COVID. Like, I mean, New York is New York. I already knew who the mayor of New York is. I don't know who the mayor of any city is except for the one that I live in generally. So I think you're right, Wesley. It's a lot. There's a lot of factors.
So the episode specifically on Throughline is it's called "What Makes Us Free," and I'm gonna put it. And I remembered, I was like, I gotta find it because it was such a good framework to critique capitalism. So this is the description, and I think it's helpful, and then we'll jump into defining some terms. The episode explores the history and influence of neoliberalism, a political project that has shaped economic and social systems for decades. The episode defines neoliberalism as an ideology that prioritizes free market principles and deregulation, arguing that these forces shape many aspects of life. It examines the role of government and individual responsibility, and it talks about how neoliberalism swallowed the world. And they're using the same logic of a unregulated capitalism. Like, it all comes from the same framework that's trying to resist socialist principles of sharing. And I loved how they framed it as about freedom, because I think the argument that you hear from conservative Christians, or not even say that, just like a lot of Christians who grew up in a Red Scare era, right? They might be moderate, but their concern is that socialism restricts freedom, like it makes us unfree. And the argument that you see in this podcast, an argument I think we're going to make today, is actually socialism is about it's giving you freedom. It's restoring your human dignity. And capitalism actually restricts your freedom because it actually it ultimately, I would argue, makes you a slave. But we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. So again, to be clear, we are not talking about communism. When we're talking about socialism, we are not talking about the kind of authoritarian communism that you would see in the Soviet Union era with bread lines and other kind of stuff. Although you did just see bread lines in America as a consequence of the defunding of SNAP. But I digress. I digress. We understand socialism as an economic system and a social system that prioritizes human need over the endless accumulation of private profit. It advocates for a world where resources are shared to meet everyone's needs, where the means of producing what we need to survive are owned and controlled collectively for the good of all, rather than being used to generate immense wealth for a tiny few. It's about organizing society around cooperation and not competition. And I want to be clear, we're talking about the means of producing what we need to survive, right? So there's certain things that I would argue, should be corporately owned, like, water, human right. You know, like these things are public goods. You know, clean air, human right. Waste management, human right. Like there's certain things that we all should have, and I think that's when we're talking about socialist principles. That's broadly speaking what at least that's I would say for myself and how I defined it because I wrote that definition. That's what I mean. So do y'all want to say anything else about how I'm defining it, or any thoughts that might slightly diverge about the definition of socialism I just gave?
Like, I fully loved Zoran Mamdani's definition that he would give on the campaign trail whenever he was asked about being a socialist or a democratic socialist. And his response was always, when we talk about politics, I call myself a democratic socialist, in many ways inspired by the words of Dr. King from decades ago, who said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, there has to be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children in this country. And so, like, that just really sings because it communicates exactly the type of world that we want to exist in, one that promotes human flourishing.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is why they always don't want to talk about King getting assassinated, because he's doing the poor people's campaign. You know what I'm saying? They're like, oh, yep, you know, as soon as he starts shifting to talking about class, they're, you know, so Blair?
I think that democratic socialism is trying to find the balance, because what we have seen historically is that unregulated capitalism leads to dehumanization. Unchallenged authoritarian communism also leads to dehumanization. And so democratic socialism is trying to say that people and life are the priority, and how can we exist in a system together where we do not dehumanize one another. And that, as I've said before, I think is Christ-like.
Julia?
And also, I like the succinct idea that workers own the right to production. I think it's so important.
No, I mean, I think that we have undervalued in America the owning the means of production. In other countries, like Spain, for instance, does this really well, but this is really getting more tangential into the weeds than people really want to know. But Spain does a pretty good job of having, and they have corporations that are very successful that make a lot of money, but they are corporations where the workers have a say in how in the way the company is run and how much profit they're going to try to generate and make. Wesley?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think is hard for people in America to wrap their minds around, especially as you get a higher paying job and gain more income, is people start to see that people don't see themselves as part of the working class. But as long as you're trading your time for wages, you are part of the working class. They could be incredible wages, they could be very good wages, but you are still trading your time for a wage. And in all of those situations, more money is going towards profits than is going into your pocket. So, like, any company that reports millions or billions of dollars of profit, like, that's money that didn't go to the workers. That's money that didn't go to the people who created that wealth, whose time and energy put together the software, whose time and energy stocked the shelves, whose time and energy healed people in hospitals. Like, we're all, unless your own capital is making you money, and that's very few of us, you are part of the working class.
It is very, very few of us. So let's get into some of the critiques that I found. The one that I find that was used to critique a socialist distribution of wealth, or socialism in general, was the Eighth Commandment about thou shalt not steal. And this was also used against an argument of even taxes for some, saying that we shouldn't be required to pay taxes, or taxes should be, you know, voluntary or whatever, because their argument is that it's money that they've earned and it's being coerced rather than freely given, so therefore it is stealing. So that was one argument against that. So I am curious, as I say, how would y'all, as I see Everett shaking their head, Blair, what is your response to such critique?
The way that Wesley just described how capitalists make their money versus the working class, to me, that sounds like theft. Like, if you are the one who is producing the value and you do not receive all of the profits from that value, that sounds to me like it's way worse than taxation.
I mean, it sounds pretty terrible to me. So I agree. But you know, like, this is their framework. Everest, how does that, when you hear that critique, because that was, I would say, that critique is kind of tied with the same, you know, when they would talk about Jesus saying, render under Caesar what is Caesar's, render under God what is God's. Like, broadly speaking, it was all framed around this Eighth Commandment, around not stealing. So what comes up for you when you kind of hear that critique?
Any of y'all watch Undercover Boss in the early 2000s?
I've seen clips.
And I feel like the whole point of that show was like that the way that we value labor is like kind of arbitrary. Like, always there's this guy whose whole job is putting on a suit and going to work in his helicopter and having someone else send 6 emails for him and going to a few meetings and making some like big decisions. And then he has to go do an actual minimum wage job. And he's like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. This is the hardest I've ever worked. And those are the people that are getting paid the least. And I think the idea that like taxing the suit guy that is having someone else send his emails and schedule his meetings is theft from him. And no one is saying that he is like stealing by being able to own a helicopter off of the backs of the people that are doing, quote unquote, the hardest job he's ever done in his life is sickening to me. And I think we have such a problem in our country of looking down on heavy quotes unskilled labor when that actually is the labor that is keeping everything going, and it is the least valued, and we are stealing from them every day.
I know, Wesley, you wanted something you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think this argument, thou shalt not steal, eighth commandment, talking about taxes, feels like yet another example of sort of a hyper individualistic society, one that doesn't care about your neighbor, one that isn't concerned about the flourishing of the people around you. And it reminds me of I don't know if you guys heard about this, was, I don't know, back in like 2004, there was a movement of libertarians who moved to a town in New Hampshire. And libertarians are don't touch my, just hands off of everything. Moved into this town in New Hampshire to transform it to a libertarian utopia. And they got into local office. They removed all the taxes, removed all city services. Like, everyone can fend for themselves. Good luck, everyone. The town got overrun by bears. And they had to, like, the whole project failed. Because there are things that in a society we cannot do by ourselves. They require collective effort, and taxes towards these services is one small thing. But this is so much larger than just. I'm glad everyone's laughing, because it is
Those
quite
are
the story.
Bears. Those are bears doing the Lord's work.
I'm thinking of Elijah and the she-bears, like.
It's crazy.
Like, God sent the bears to let them know, no, y'all, this is not what I want, y'all.
Well, if no one's picking up their trash and it's just laying around and you're surrounded by wilderness, bears are gonna come eat. So yeah, it's just like we forget, or people who subscribe to this like forget that we have an accountability for one another that requires collective effort, and taxes are one of the things that help us get there.
And as you say, Wesley, government works the best when you don't think about it. And nobody thinks about the fact that our taxes pay for our trash collection. And that if you have a system with no taxation at all, what happens to the trash?
One of the challenges we have is that we can take for granted the infrastructure that's just in place, that's just there. Even what's happening right now with the Department of Education. And I know, Julia, you put this in the the group chat. Like, I'm paying attention to it because I have a son who has particular educational needs that need to get met. And the dismantling of the Department of Education is putting our capacity to go to public school in jeopardy. And the problem is with going to private school is these things aren't regulated in the same way, right? And so we are witnessing the dismantling of public goods that people just take for granted. And it's not until it's gone do they realize, oh, wow, we really actually needed this. So again, the primary critique, or against the response to the critique about it being theft, is that when it's out of context. When they wrote the Bible, they weren't talking about taxes. They're talking about like literally stealing someone's animal. It's taken a large leap and taken it out of context to say that it prohibits a community from organizing its economy for the common good. Like, that's just too large of a leap. The other critique, or another objection people would have to saying that Christians should be socialist, is they would say Jesus is a capitalist. And there's one parable that I found that they consistently pointed to was the parable of the talents. And so for those of you who don't know, this is in Matthew 25. And in the story, a master gives 3 servants large sums of money, what they call talents, each according to his ability. And the first 2 invest the money and double it, and they're praised as good and faithful. The third servant, who is afraid of his master and calls his master a hard man, he buries his talent, and his master calls him wicked and lazy, and his talent is taken and given to the one with the most. And the parable ends with the line, "For to everyone who has, more will be given, but from who has not, even that will be taken away. Now, the capitalist reading of this is obvious, like God rewards risk and profit. The first two servants are like basically entrepreneurs, and the third is punished for having a zero growth mindset. And I want to suggest that parable is actually being misread if you read it in a capitalist way. But I know we had some pre-conversation. So, Blair, is there something you wanted to say about that particular reading, or about how we might read that parable in a different way or interpret it in a different way than the capitalist way?
Reminder that talents are money.
Exactly.
So like a talent is like a week's worth of wages. So it's obviously also a metaphor. Like it's not meant to be instruction about money. It's meant to be instruction about like
exploitation.
The things, and the things that God gives us, right? And that we're not
And
supposed
I think
to
a talent
keep the things that God gives us to ourselves. We're supposed to share them and multiply them.
I think it's even more than a week. I want to say it's a year. I'll look it up real quick, but it's like a lot.
It's
like
so
it's a
much
ridiculous
money.
amount of money. Yeah. But go ahead, please.
There's a whole new train of thought with Becky Copeland, who we've had on the podcast, thinking about how the servants are not the foolish ones in the parables with masters and servants, that over and over again, those parables are used to display how the master is the foolish one. You know, you could also argue that, like, why would you criticize a servant who has nothing for making sure he kept his master's money safe? And it actually is revealing the foolishness of the master. And if you can read the parable, understanding that Jesus is critiquing the master, not that God is the master, but that Jesus is critiquing the masters, then it reads in a totally different way.
100%. That is a more common reading now, but I know Everett, there's something you wanted to share.
Well, I would like to take your parable of the talents and raise it parable of the workers in the vineyard. For those who are not familiar, it's basically this guy is going out and hiring people to work on his vineyard, and he hires them throughout the day and is like, I'm going to pay you as much as you need, basically. And then at the end of the day, pays all of them the same, no matter how long they've been working. And that is actually really hard to grapple with, I think, because growing up in a capitalist society, I think the concept of deserving and of getting what you're owed is so important, and getting paid what you are owed in a way that is always placing you above other people so that you have a sense of security, like that is so central to our idea of security. But I think reading that parable and being like, actually the whole point is that we all work together and we are all given enough. And I think a lot about how capitalism forbids us to ever have enough. Like it's always more. It's always like hoarding wealth as much as possible, and there's never enough for everyone. And so you have to just keep grabbing at what you can. But I think that parable has always been an example to me of being like, I feel like the Bible is a real socialist text. I don't know, guys.
And it makes people uncomfortable because it is so socialist, I would argue. I think that it is about saying we have enough. And it's one that we have to really wrestle with, because Jesus is trying to help us, I think, call attention to the ways in which labor is exploited, particularly because you look at this is when Blair is talking about the point of reading the other parable with the talents. Like, it's critiquing the master. Like we assume things, we can read it in a way where we think ourselves to either be the victims or people to be God, rather than asking ourselves, well, what was Jesus actually talking about within a broader context of this, and how might we actually think about it from that perspective of his audience? Wesley?
Yeah, I'm fully interested in a critique of the master for some of these texts. I guess I'm wondering, how do we read for to everyone who has, more will be given, but from those who have, but for the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Like, how are we supposed to read that against the master?
So the way that they're reading it is they're saying that Jesus is suggesting that is what the master is saying, that's still speaking from the perspective of the Roman Empire. And so the servant that doesn't actually participate in that exploitative practice is actually basically engaging in a kind of non-violent resistance. Like, he is showing how power works in a fallen world. And so Jesus is lamenting the logic of empire. He's also critiquing a predatory system where people like don't reap where they sow, I think is what they say in that passage. And so I think it's more recognizing that up through the very end of that parable, Jesus is critiquing the master by saying, if you keep this system, this Roman system, this imperial system in place, that's how you will be treated. And I think it goes right, and after this, it goes right into, if I'm not mistaken, Wesley, in Matthew 25, to the parable of the sheep and the goats, right? We're talking about separating people based on like literally what you do, like literally taking care of people. Like, you know, do you visit me when I'm in prison? Do you visit me when I'm sick? Do you give me clothes when I'm naked? Like, it goes right into actions in solidarity and caring for people. And again, this is, I know, and Blair, you've said this multiple times, and I think it's really, I want to say it again, why you have to read the Bible in community. Like, you have to read the Bible in community. And when you do that, I think it allows you to see and engage these parables and these stories in a broader context.
Well, and I want to add to something that Julia said earlier, which is folks think that God is a capitalist, but actually it's the opposite. And what I realized when you said that, Julia, is that capitalists, it's not necessarily that God is not a capitalist. That's not necessarily the opposite that I thought of. What I thought of was, it's that capitalists think they're God. So as they read this story, they think whoever is the landowner must be the representation of God, because they think of themselves as gods who can control the system and who can control the society. And I don't think there's anything more anathema or heretical than putting oneself in the place of God.
So much of the critiques I feel like we've had, especially when we did the episodes on Christian nationalism, but it does come back to, again, those first 3 commandments about you're not God. You should have no other gods other than me. And that the radicality of Moses is the foundation upon which Jesus is speaking to and building upon. And so, like, if we could just kind of capture that, I think we'd be in a good place. Julia?
Earlier, when I said that, I was referring to what I always say is, for these people, capitalism is their religion and money is their God. To me, they do make money their idol. They worship it above all else. That's like, to me, the biggest sin of the nation. I mean, listen, the nation has many sins. I'm not trying to, we're not going to count them. You know what I mean? There are many, many, many. But at the bottom of it, what flows underneath all of it is the obsession with money, that every single thing is for sale. Your own children's lives, when they go to school, is for sale. Everything is for sale. Nothing is sacred because money is the God.
So another critique that people had was that the Acts 2, where they gathered together, was voluntary and not coerced. And so for those of you who aren't aware, so in Acts 2, the early church gathered, and this is after the Pentecost, after they have the Holy Spirit, doused upon them in as a flame. So Acts 2 verses 44 through 47 read, all believers were united and shared everything. They would sell pieces of property and possessions and distribute the proceeds to everyone who needed them. Every day they met together in the temple and ate in their homes. They shared food with gladness and simplicity. They praised God and demonstrated God's goodness to everyone. The Lord added daily to the community those who were being saved. And so the argument that they have against as kind of a social democratic or socialism is they were saying, well, this happened. This isn't socialism because it was voluntary. It wasn't enforced. Right. And so that is one way in which they respond to it. And the thing that came up for me as I was trying to think through responses is that I think the argument over coercion versus voluntary ignores the goal, basically, and the ethic, like why they're actually doing this. The goal was the elimination of need. They're like, if we pool our resources together, we won't actually have needs. Like, this is literally what Wesley said about the bears, right? Like, if we pool our resources together, we can actually meet our needs better. And so the ethic was that private wealth, technically, can, if we collectively have it and share it, that our wealth can allow us to be sustained and sustainable. And the fact to me that they achieved it voluntarily, to me, it makes it more radical that they didn't have to be coerced into it. They were like, hey, you know what? If we put our resources together, we actually might be able to survive. Maybe we should all do that. And because of all the ways in which we've experienced the sacred together. Blair?
But then right after that story in Acts is the story of Ananias and Sapphira, which is members of the community who withhold their wealth and God smites them. God kills them. They die. So this idea that like God, this isn't what God wants unless it's voluntary, I don't think that's true based on what the scripture tells us. Again, when we read it in context. Also, the argument that capitalist Christians will make is that the community was together sharing means we should share with other Christians, which is like thinking of that woman who was calling asking for formula. One of the churches said, "Are you a member of the church?" And that some churches think they're only supposed to share in this way with other Christians. But the history tells us that's not what Christian communities did. They truly shared with any who had need and actually brought people into the community in order to feed them and to care for them, orphans, widows, etc. Like they extended the table. They didn't keep a closed table. That's not what the sharing was for.
And that's honestly one of the reasons why the early church grew so quickly. One of is because they were actually meeting those needs. Julia?
How does it make sense though if you're saying I would give, but I just don't want you to make me, but then you're not? Do you see what I'm saying? So then give. Like what? So you're complaining that someone is asking you to give and forcing you to do it. Your argument is that if they didn't force you to do it, you would do it. You're not even doing it now. Like I don't understand.
Yeah, no, because it's not a good argument. That's why you don't understand. Because like because there's nothing stopping them from giving, but they're saying, "Oh, I don't want you to make me do it." Like, well,
but you're not doing it.
But yeah, you're not doing it. So, well, that's you're logical. Julie, you're being logical.
You want that consistency.
Exactly.
I do.
And that's going to trip you up every time. So, and the last objection that people made, and this came up a lot in Snap as well. So I gestured towards this a little bit in the last few episodes, quoting Paul.
Thessalonians?
2 Thessalonians 3:10.
Oh.
Even when we were with you, we were giving you this command: if anyone doesn't want to work, they shouldn't eat. So they were basically saying that like socialism is anti-work. I think the counter argument one might say to this anti-work critique is that socialist isn't anti-work. It's redefining work as human dignity. And so on one hand, I would say the strongest critique against this reading of 2 Thessalonians is that it's wrong, and that Paul was telling these people who were thinking that Jesus was coming back any day now, so they were choosing not to work, that, hey, you actually have to work until Jesus comes, right? So it was a whole different kind of eschatological framework, as we would say. Paul wasn't saying, he wasn't critiquing like a social distribution of the good. And so in this sense, what I'm trying to argue with respect to work is that socialism at its best seeks to restore the dignity of labor, ensuring that work isn't exploitative and that everyone who is able can contribute meaningfully. And one of the things that came up in our pre-show meeting was the ways in which like we have labor laws, like the 40-hour work week. Like all these things came from early, and this was actually in Mamdani's speech. There's a history of labor organizers in this country that, again, as Everett said, we're deliberately not being taught the workers' history of this country that allowed us to have some of the benefits we have, like a 40-hour work week. Like
people used to die at work, like all the time.
People died at work during COVID. Like, I mean, that was one of the things like the workers that were being exploited the most during COVID, these factory workers who were working in industrial farm factories in the Midwest, a lot of Latinx Central American workers, they died because they were here undocumented. They were being coerced into going to work and they died. Go ahead, Julia.
So usually the argument that I hear, and this is a secular argument, when everyone says, oh, socialism, it doesn't work, it always fails. This really upsets me because here's the thing about economies. They all fail. They all fail. None of them are supposed to, unless anyone here is getting their goods from the Silk Road. You are aware of a shifting economy, the way that it changes. Either it changes gracefully or it changes violently. And like we all have lived through at least one, potentially another one coming up, times that capitalism itself has also failed. The Great Depression was capitalism failing. They fail.
The 2008 crash was capitalism failing. Obama bailing them out. And what we're experiencing right now, Giannis, and I can't say his last name, but the Greek economist. Yep, there we go. Techno-feudalism. I'm like, we are in the midst of capitalism failing. It's being propped up right now artificially by a lot of government investment.
Using the failure of the thing as an excuse for it to not do it, it's a load of bunk.
A load of bunk. So I want to end by giving
all.
everybody a chance to share a little bit about what I would love to hear the way in which you, in your understanding of Jesus or Christianity, has led you to come to this more social democratic vision of what it looks like for what I would call a just distribution of the good. And Blair, I'll start with you, and if there's something else you need to share, that's fine too. But I would like to end on a more positive, uplifting note of how we see and practice Christianity.
And just as a response to Julia's critique that we can't try socialism because it will fail, we need socialism because capitalism has failed. And even back to the argument about Second Thessalonians is he who does not work shouldn't eat. Well, we got a whole lot of people in this country right now who are working their butts off and still can't eat. So we have lost the plot significantly. I wanted to mention there was a TikToker, Same Old Sean, who was talking about the critique of Zoran Mamdani and other socialists bringing forward policies that people are claiming are unrealistic. And the reminder that like civil rights for Black people was once unrealistic. Voting and economic rights for women was once unrealistic. The fact that children would go to school instead of laboring in the fields was once unrealistic. People died for the 8-hour workday and for us to have weekends. Those were all unrealistic policies when they were put forward. And so if we shoot for the unrealistic, if we shoot for the kingdom of God, where all people and all creation is given dignity, we might land somewhere better than where we are right now. Ultimately, as a person of hope, a person who believes in something bigger than myself, even if I won't see the end of it, I'm willing to move towards things that I believe are Christ-like, that uplift creation, because that's what Christ calls me to do, whether or not I ever see the ending for myself.
Well, and we probably won't. That is like something that I have really come to accept, is that like I really, really hope and believe that there can be a world without prisons. I really hope and believe that there can be a world that looks really, really, really different, where people are all treated with dignity in a way that I think aligns with what Jesus would want and rejoice in. And I don't think that I will get to see it. And I'm still going to spend my whole life like trying to inch us towards that anyway, because what else is there? Like, I'm like fully aware that a large reason that I believe that is because if I didn't, I would like never leave my house again. But I think that you're right. And I think that like in the same way that we have faith in God, we have to have faith in the kingdom of God being possible here, even if it seems really far away and distant. And yeah, I mean, I just think that to answer Dr. Carter's question about how I like got to this point, there is like no place in the Bible where Jesus asks if someone deserves healing or deserves love or deserves inclusion or to be lifted up or to be brought to the table. I mean, I guess there's one point where he asks if they deserve it, and then he immediately is like, oops, sorry, you do deserve it. I apologize. That is like something that I really try to push back against when I hear good Christian people falling into the rhetoric of being like, but do those people deserve that? But do like what if that takes away from me? And I love being like, does Jesus ask that question though? Like when we are out in the world and we are like, do I want to give? Do I want to work towards a more generous world? What if someone gets something that they don't deserve? I'm like it feels like Blair said, that is really losing the plot a little bit and forgetting what we actually like, what Jesus actually says.
Julia, I'm curious about, from your perspective, as a burgeoning theology student, but also just a Christian, like how is your reading of Jesus? How has it led you to this kind of what we would call again a more socialist, social democratic vision of what our economy, really what the democracy should look like?
I think a lot about the Sermon on the Mount and the fact that no one there left hungry and that it was considered a miracle. And I remember once I heard a sermon about it, and the pastor was like, well, what if the miracle, the way that everything was multiplied was just that everyone put together what they had.
And then there was enough.
And then there was enough.
Exactly. The abundance. Mm-hmm.
And I think about it all the time because like something you just said, like when you think about like what people deserve, like no one thinks that everyone deserves, 100 jet skis and like a ski chalet.
Super
Like
yacht.
that's not what
Everyone should have a yacht.
the United States is the wealthiest nation that has ever existed in human over-resourced on a day-to-day basis. The amount of food that is wasted, the amount of homes and apartments that sit vacant, empty because no one can figure out a way to make a profit off of them. All of these things, it's just, I don't just think that it's bad. Like I think that it is evil, and I think that it is antithetical to the teachings of Christ. And it sickens me. It disgusts me. I think that the fact that there are people who claim to be Christian who say that anyone who question what any person deserves at all is foul. And I would say it to their faces. So that's that on that. I said what I said.
Amen.
Thanks for asking.
Thank you for answering. Wesley, is there anything you want to add in terms of how your reading of Jesus or your practice of Christianity has kind of led you to this place?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Beatitudes are a wonderful place to return to. But I also fundamentally just the idea of like love your neighbor as yourself and thinking about what are the things that you want in order for your own life to have flourishing, and then wanting that and working towards that for your neighbor. Is sort of what keeps me organizing locally, what pushes me to fight for change in my workplace, at my university, or in my community here in Los Angeles. It's this idea that if I want to flourish, I should want that for other people as well. And so I should be fighting for that same thing, because our reality is connected. We do not live isolated. As much as we may want to think that we can isolate ourselves from society, that will never be the case. One of the things for me that is reified in sort of focusing on the Beatitudes and love your neighbor as yourself is that these things are not dependent on what you contribute to society. It's not dependent on what job you have or what status you have. It's like you, just by being human, deserve that dignity. And so that's what pushes me in that direction. It's your identity as a human being. Is important, and it should be valorized.
That's amazing. Thank you, Wesley.
I just want to plug 2 pop culture things that I think are really relevant to our conversation. First, Good Fortune is a movie that recently came out. It was kind of like subverting the guardian angel trope of cinema, but it was actually a really, really amazing depiction of and critique of poverty and wealth, like specifically in Los Angeles. It was so well done that halfway through the movie, Uriah and I were like, I don't believe that a rich person wrote this. Like, this feels so in touch with like how living and hustling in LA feels, but it also is like touching on the thing that Blair said, which is like people actually don't, or no, Julia said it. That's like people don't want jet skis and yachts and mansions. People literally want to be able to like eat and have a treat every now and then and pay their rent without having a panic attack. Like that is, anyway. Second, last night I went to a concert. It was an artist named Leith Ross. They are really amazing. They are a poet. They have this song called I Can See the Future. And it is like about the thing that we were talking about, that is like believing in the world. And it's from the point of view of someone that is living in a world that is like post exploitation and post prison and post police. And they said this thing at the concert that was like, I like continue to stay in organizing. I continue to stay reaching for the world that I can envision, because I like have this friend in the future that is like, I can't believe you had to live through that. It seems so far away now. I can't believe that there was ever a world where those things were normal. And it was really emotional and beautiful. And it's like a little bit of a anthem for me. Whenever I feel myself burning out, I like try to tap into the like real people that will live in the future, that will be like, actually, we all have all we need. And I can't believe you ever didn't see that before.
No, I think for me, the reason I came to these kind of socialist and social democratic principles is like fundamentally because of how I understand the way Jesus engaging the world. And Everest, you gestured towards this when you said Jesus never asked, does anybody deserve this? And in fact, Jesus is giving to people who Jesus is clearly aware that they don't deserve stuff. like in terms of with the way he encounters, well, and with the way we would think about deserve. By the way, Jesus is talking about, healing people like the Syrophoenician woman, right? Like that's when Jesus gets to push back about what is and what isn't deserved. And because Jesus is working with those who are considered non-persons consistently, and non-persons are children and women, like people who are orphans, bringing them into the fold, healing them, providing for them, because the Sermon on the Mount calls us to say, blessed are the poor, blessed are those who are weeping. Like it is an inversion of the power structures that we have. And because Jesus' first sermon is about the abolition of everything that causes us material suffering. And it's an invitation, his first words, right? The kingdom of God is at hand is an invitation for us to come together and work together in solidarity towards this vision of what we can become. So that's, for me, is one reason. But the second reason, and I want to close this out by saying this, is tied to things that I heard from my grandfather, and honestly from Julia's mother, most recently. Like, because I am fortunate enough to have a grandfather whose ancestors touched slavery, and because he tells stories that I'm reminded that we're talking about 4 generations away from my people being enslaved on one side of my family. How can I have the audacity not to have hope that things can change? Like, that is insane. Because my grandfather literally was in the field picking cotton when he was 10 years old. And I have a PhD and 2 master's degrees. I'm like, and my grandfather didn't learn how to read until he needed to get a promotion at his factory job. So things can change. Economic systems can change. The world can change if we are committed to moving towards that end. The kingdom of God is at hand, and it is really incumbent upon us to bring it to life. And so I believe that's what Jesus is calling us to do. And I believe this social democratic vision is one way we can do it. And so to answer the question we put at the beginning of this podcast, yes, Christians should be socialists. But I doubt any of y'all were surprised at that. But anyway, thanks for joining us for the Progressive Christians podcast. The Progressive Christian podcast is a ministry of The Loft, a worship community of West United Methodist Church. If you'd like to connect with us and be a part of the conversation, you can find us on all social media platforms at The Progressive Christians. Our show is mixed and edited by our wonderful audio engineer, AJ. If you like the show, please rate, review, share, and subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Send the show to someone that you think will enjoy it. Also, I meant to say this at the top, but I totally forgot. We will be taking next week off because I'm going to be working at a big nerd conference and we don't have time to do another podcast. So we're taking a week off. Enjoy Indigenous Peoples Day, where we don't acknowledge the white, the genocide of Indigenous folks, where we gather together in festive celebration of community and football. So...
No football for me. Thank you. No
football for you. All right. Football for me. I'll take all the extra football. Anyway, thanks y'all. I will see y'all later. Bye.
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 Bye.